The great speed limit debate, faster and safer. Could this be possible? The group SENSE, which stands for Safety by Education, Not Speed Enforcement, is calling for speed limits to be bumped up to 130 kilometers per hour. The group's causing quite a debate in BC because they are charging that on many BC highways, the speed limits are set deliberately low, not for safety reasons, but in order to generate revenue. Ian Tootill is co-founder of SENSE. He's in studio with me, and Cedric Hughes is also here. He's a personal injury lawyer with Hughes & Company Law Corporation. He will disagree with Ian Tootill, but let me give Ian Tootill the first opportunity to make his case. Good morning.
Morning, Bill. First off, I'd like to just say that I don't think I've ever suggested that the motivation behind the low speed limits is more money. The more money is a byproduct of what they've been up to. What we're simply suggesting, contrary to what Mr. Hughes wrote in his column, is that we're not suggesting that travel speeds go up. We're suggesting that the reasonable actions of the safe majority of people on BC highways are made legal so that we're not at risk of arbitrary fines and enforcement.
But do you think that the speed limits are too low?
In many cases, they are too low, as set out in an independent speed limit review that was done in 2002 that SENSE actually demanded that the provincial government did. And on an anecdotal basis, what set off this debate was a column I wrote for the Vancouver Sun about 3 weeks ago. And just my anecdotal observation driving the Coquihalla Highway, I can tell you that I was pretty much the only one at times on that road that was actually doing the speed limit just as an experiment.
And the speed limit there would be mostly 110?
Speed limit on that road is mostly 110, except where you go through the urban area near Merritt there.
But if you set your speed control at 110, my experience tells me you're constantly being passed.
Exactly. I once, this is not the subject of the article, this was another time I was on that road, I followed an RCMP officer all the way to Merritt once at 125. And there was a bottleneck behind that car that went on for probably 20, 30 car lengths.
Cedric Hughes, you disagree?
Well, one point I want to make, and the key point is that if the speed limit is set at a certain speed, it has to be obeyed. It is the law. The dominant public opinion or the dominant opinion of motorists does not change the law. And that has to be emphasized, and I don't think Mr. Tootill is fundamentally disagreeing with that. In terms of how fast motorists can drive, it's a very difficult issue. It's an international issue. Highway speeds are set in the range of 70 kilometers per hour to 130 internationally by responsible nations worldwide. Whether BC can tolerate or sustain a 130 kilometer per hour speed limit on its highways is really a matter up to the traffic engineers, the highway safety experts, and ultimately the politicians, not the motoring public. So that's the basic position.
The motoring public does seem to set the tone, as Mr. Tootill says. If you're on the Coquihalla, everybody pretty well is driving in excess of the speed limit. If you're in the Stanley Park Causeway,
right,
everybody, if you do the speed limit, you'll feel like you're standing still.
I agree with those observations. I don't think anybody who's been out on the roadways recently can deny that the public are pushing the speed limits, and it's going to be up to the government and to review that issue. And Mr. Tootill is making that point. One other thing I will say about speed limits is they tend to be set on the basis of the average driver and not the skilled driver, and that's a problem. It basically is determined by reference to the lowest common denominator. That's a driver who perhaps doesn't have the same skills as people who are enthusiastic with Mr. Tootill's position of raising the speed limit. So there's concerns about raising the speed limit, but raising the speed limit doesn't, in my view, necessarily mean there's going to be more accidents. One thing I want to say, though, about speed is, and there's this, I suppose, fairly vacuous statement about speed kills, but it's true in a certain fundamental sense that when we see a car accident that involves great speed, we see usually a great catastrophe. And there's the obvious other logic, and that is that when something's not moving, it's not going to crash. So speed and extreme speed are factors in disastrous accidents. The issue of raising the speed limit to a higher number, whether it's 130K or whatever, and whether that will produce more accidents is an imponderable in my view.
Don't you also get frustration, though, when speed limits seem to be too low and people are adhering to them and other people are anxious to get by and perhaps taking risks they shouldn't be taking?
Well, it's not an issue if you're on a divided highway with two lanes. If there's some lane discipline, which is the other thing a lot of these countries enforce, where there are higher speed limits and higher speeds, as long as people adhere to some lane discipline, you don't get the kind of road rage that develops on some of the highways in BC, where there are people adhering to the posted speed limit and sitting in what's commonly known elsewhere as the passing lane. And, to address some of Mr. Hughes' points, there's only one reason why highways are built, and that's to get people from A to B quickly. So speed is a good thing. And, highways have been invented or engineered for a specific purpose, and engineers take physics courses and they apply that knowledge. And simple physics says, as Mr. Hughes says, that the harder you hit, the more damage you're going to do and the more fatalities. So on high-speed freeways, we remove all the impediments to safety. We take away the on-ramps. We take away the single-lane roads. We put nice medians in between the roads. We put rumble strips on the side of the road so that people don't go to sleep. We extend the sight lines so that there's more braking distance. We make the road safer. And on the particular road that I'm taking at issue today, which is the Coquihalla, all of those things are in place. We have a road that is begging for people to drive it faster. They go out there, they drive it faster, and they're all at risk or mostly at risk for arbitrary enforcement. When we did the surveys back, or when we looked at the numbers back in the 90s and looked at the type of compliance they had on that road, they had about 70% non-compliance to the speed limit on the Coquihalla Highway, and I doubt, after all the enforcement over the years and the threat of impoundments and everything else that they're doing, that it's any different.
Let me get to some calls. I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. 604-280-9898. Toll free around the province. 1-877-399-9898. My phones are open to you. Should speed limits be increased? Ian Tootill is co-founder of SENSE. That stands for Safety by Education, Not Speed Enforcement. Cedric Hughes is a personal injury lawyer with Hughes and Company Law Corporation. He tends to think, no, the speed limits are okay. Is that fair? Like, you think they're pretty much in where they should be?
Well, the problem that I see at the moment, and I think anybody who takes a careful look at this culturally, is that in North America, we have not yet equated good driving with good citizenship the way it is equated in Europe. Bad driving or poor driving or unskillful driving in Europe, my impression is that it's socially unacceptable. So people... it's socially unacceptable in the way that here it has become socially unacceptable to toss garbage out of your vehicle. That in the 50s and 60s, that was a big social problem. And through time and through legislation, that problem was cured. We now need a consciousness amongst our drivers that good driving and particularly defensive driving is essential. It's not optional. Just the way drivers get their driver's licensing these days, they go through certain hoops, and I'm not critical of the BC driving courses. I think they've done a magnificent job in upgrading the standards. But I think there's still a way to go, and there's a government awareness issue that good citizenship is evidenced in part through good driving skills.
Let me get to some calls. I want to sample public opinion on this. Beth.
Hi there.
Hi.
Yeah, I wanted to comment, on the Sea to Sky Highway. They've done such a great job in improving it, yet when you get to Lions Bay, the speed limit drops down to 60. I don't know anybody who goes 60 through Lions Bay. Then you get to Squamish, which has a lot more people on the highway, walking the side of the highway, and it's 70 kilometers an hour through the main town. So I'm confused as to why they would drop that one to 60, and most people, I think, are probably doing at least 90, 100 down the Sea to Sky.
Well, it's a popular misconception that I've ever suggested any speed limit on any road. Actually, we've broken with tradition in that sense and suggested the methodology that should be used for setting speed limits. And they don't use the accepted methodology in BC. It's called the 85th percentile. That's the speed to which up to 85% of the drivers travel. That's the upper end of safe travel speed, measuring the free flow of traffic over a period of time. So what they do in BC is they set speed limits with politics in mind. In Lions Bay, you're going to have residents that are concerned about their ability to enter and exit the highway. So you've got other issues besides what may seem reasonable to the person who's just casually traveling through the area. My beef with the Sea to Sky is that we spent almost $1 billion upgrading that highway. We made it, this wide 4-lane divided highway, and we've kept the 80 kilometer an hour speed limit. And anecdotally, I was on that road too a couple of weeks ago. I had somebody else drive me to Whistler, and I sat in the back seat of a car, and that person did between 100 and 120 kilometers an hour.
Alan, good morning.
Morning. Yeah, I'm a delivery driver around Vancouver, and I'm generally doing the speed limit. But when I am, I can guarantee that 95% of the people are speeding past me. I don't think that raising the speed limits is going to help, because then people just think, I can do 10 or 20 over that, and that'll be safe.
Not true. It may seem a reasonable assumption on your part to suggest that, but the statistics and the surveys and the proof is not there to back up what you just said. And, while it might seem that speed creep is reasonable, if you raise the limit marginally, maybe people will think that they can go just a little bit faster. But I'll ask you a question. If you set the speed at 300 kilometers an hour, how many people do you think are going to be going that speed? If you set the limits properly, you will not get speed creep.
Rick, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. I drive the Coquihalla every week, and the one thing that I've noticed since the tolls have come off is we definitely have issues with drivers blocking the traffic in the left lane, not only cars but also trucks. That's becoming a very serious issue where cars will just deliberately stay in the left lane and block traffic, 10, 20 vehicles deep, and they will.
Are they doing the speed limit or not?
Some are, some are not. Some are actually below the speed limit. When you pull up behind them, they'll actually slow down and even further block your...
Why would somebody do that?
Yeah, that's an interesting...
that is another phenomenon that is so irritating and the cause of all kinds of road rage on the roads in BC. Cedric and I were talking before we came on the show downstairs, and I was saying that one of our campaigns has been Keep Right Except to Pass. If you look at all those signs in BC now on the highways, many of them have been replaced from slower traffic keep right to Keep Right Except to Pass. That's our doing with Kevin Falcon. And we've also asked for legislation to back it up, but the provincial government, for some reason, doesn't want to do it. And it's stupid. They should do it. They should have the same legislation that they have in the U.S. You cross the border down to Washington State, there's a big sign as soon as you go south of the border. It says state law, keep right except to pass. You have no business in the passing lane on a highway, whether you're doing the speed limit or not, unless you're overtaking somebody. You cause speed variance in driver interactions if you're there.
Well, I'm just trying to think what it would be like coming off a BC ferry and having everybody in the right lane.
Well, that's the argument that's made by the naysayers that say it can't be done. There are stretches of road between here and, say, the Port Mann Bridge where it's always congested. You can't realistically pull over. However, there are people occupying things like the HOV lane that have no business being in the HOV lane. Just because they've got two people in the car doesn't mean to say they need to be in that lane if they're not going any faster than anybody else.
Back with more of your calls. Talking about speed limits with Ian Tootill, co-founder of SENSE, Safety by Education, Not Speed Enforcement, and Cedric Hughes, a personal injury lawyer. And I welcome your calls to them. Jean, in Quebec.
Hi. Our minister driver showed us that speed does not kill. Unfortunately, brutal deceleration does. In June of 2006, Texas raised its speed limit to 130 kilometers an hour in rural areas. During the following 5 years, the number of deaths fell by 15%. Therefore, in November, on a new highway to be inaugurated in Austin, the new limit will be 138 kilometers an hour.
But you're telling me that they raised the speed limit and fatalities decreased.
Exactly, even though Texas did not know the recession because of oil fields.
Right. I've been so rude. I've taken so much time. But look, the speed limit, the trend in the U.S., 35 states have raised their speed limits. And, the latest report that I read out of the USA Today the other day was that this is going to be a trend. But
didn't they lower them initially in order to try to preserve fuel?
It was all politics. And we just did the same thing that the U.S. did. We went from, 70-mile-an-hour limits back in the 60s. We dropped, when we went metric, we dropped everything to 80 kilometers an hour, which was 50. And the trend has been the other way globally, and we haven't followed it. And the reality is that the naysayers, or the people that keep saying that we can't do it because fatalities will go up, have to start addressing the issue that it's just not happening.
Mr. Hughes?
Well, the roads in other parts of the world are not necessarily our roads. I'm not an expert in Texas roads, but I suspect that there's a lot more, although I have been to Texas a couple of times. I suspect their roads are longer, straighter, and flatter than ours in the majority. We've got a mountainous situation here in British Columbia and a lot of windy and tortuous highways, well built, but it's a different kind of geography. So, that's a factor for the traffic engineers and for the politicians to consider if the trend is to raise the speed limit to 130 kilometers per hour. Certainly the worldwide trend seems to be to raise speed limits with better engineered highways and better engineered vehicles. That's obvious to any casual observer.
Jeff, good morning.
Good morning, Bill. I just wanted to agree with your guess that speed limits should be raised. I drive every day all over the Lower Mainland for my job, and no one is driving the speed limits that are set. I just wanted to bring up the example of the Golden Ears Bridge. Brand new bridge, it's 6 lanes and the speed limit is 80. And on the Langley side, it's 60, and on the Maple Ridge side, it's 70. And the police are there every other day on the Langley side, nailing people coming off the bridge doing 100, 110. It's a great example that they've set it up that way, 2-ticket drivers. No one is doing 70 coming off of that bridge on the Maple Ridge side. You're coming down that hill, you're picking up speed. 100, 110 is regular. And, of course, if you hit 110 into that 70, then you're getting excessive speeding.
Jeff, thank you. I'm going to give you the last word. My thanks to Cedric Hughes and Ian Tootill. One thing we will all agree on, I think, if you're not